Welcome to Heroes and Patriots.
And the views and opinion expressed throughout the broadcast day are those of the speakers and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, or underwriters. Time will be made available for other viewpoints. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Dorothy. The beauties of live radio. We'll start again. Welcome to
the beauty of my co-host.
Welcome to Heroes and Patriots, a program about national security, intelligence, and foreign policy. And as Dorothy mentioned, this is the 5th Thursday of January, so we are back, and then we'll be back in a week from today. It is Thursday, January 30th, 2025, and we're streaming live from the studios of KMUD Community Radio here in Northern California. I'm Mary Massey, and I am a co-host with John SAKOWICZ. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Mary, and good morning to our listeners listening to the live broadcast here in Northern California, and to those listening to the live web stream throughout the country and throughout the world. Just two quick notes. I mentioned to our guests before the show, and the show is about the third impeachment attempt on Donald Trump, that however remote these chances seem, here in our own district, we're suing our congressman. We've made national news.
And we hope to have an update if we can get someone online in maybe 10 minutes.
Correct. So
before the end.
To our listeners, who we like to regard as some of the smartest and most progressive people on the planet, have hope. You can take action. You can be aware of the things being done in your name, and you can resist. So I want to put that out there. I also want to thank the Erickson Group for providing our guest today. I was speaking to their president, Ed Erickson, that our show is heavily populated, and our team here at Heroes and Patriots, heavily populated with combat vets. We're very military friendly. And doing a show on the impeachment of the president, or doing a show, as we've had in the past, on suing our congressman against for war crimes in Israel, is military friendly. These are vets that are coming together and saying, again, not in our name, not in our name.
Thank you, John. So we're going to get started, but just a reminder that today's program and all programs are archived at kmud.org, on our YouTube page and our Facebook pages, and our program website, heroespatriots.org. I'm having a little technical difficulties getting into that, but check back. As Dorothy said, views and opinions are those of our speakers, and equal time is made available. I don't know if we'll get into any of that. So listeners, you may call in on topic to speak with our guest today. That number, 707-923-3911. So 4 minutes past the hour, we're going to be joined now by John C. Bonifaz. He is the president of Free Speech for People out of Amherst. John is a constitutional attorney and the co-founder and president of Free Speech for People. He previously served as the executive director and general counsel of the National Voting Rights Institute, an organization he founded in 1994, and as the legal director of Voter Action, a national election integrity organization. He has been at the forefront of key voting rights and democracy campaigns here in the United States for more than 33 decades. He is a graduate of Harvard Law School and a recipient of a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. He knows his stuff. Hi, John. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, John. Great to be with you.
Those MacArthur Foundation awards are pretty sweet, aren't they?
Well, I was fortunate to receive one, yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So maybe the first, the place to start is to give us a little background about your organization, what they do, and then we can kind of contrast what happened the last time Trump was impeached in 21, and why you think there's a possibility now. So why don't we start with your organization?
Sure. So Free Speech for People is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to defending our democracy and our constitution all across the country. We were launched 15 years ago this month on the day of the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United v. FEC in January of 2010, which of course overturned a century of precedent barring corporate money in our elections and equated for the first time corporations as people with political speech rights. We have ever since been heavily involved in multiple fights to defend our democracy, including challenging big money in politics, fighting to protect the right to vote, challenging voter suppression, voter intimidation, taking on unchecked corporate power, including now social media companies, when they're not held liable for amplifying threats of violence and disinformation on their platforms, and holding those at the highest levels of our government accountable when they abuse their power and engage in rampant corruption. And that leads, of course, to why we have launched impeachtrumpagain.org.
Oh, so you're already underway. Just switching back to the earlier impeachments, you're a constitutional lawyer. Do you feel that in, let's say, 2019 and then the following, where he was charged with the riot and needed to be impeached and was impeached, do you feel that those two incidents were justified from a constitutional standpoint?
Well, they were absolutely justified as impeachable offenses from a
Okay,
constitutional standpoint, but we argued starting on the inauguration of Donald Trump in January of 2017 that he deserved to face impeachment proceedings. We co-led with Roots Action that first impeachment campaign, and that was because he had started his presidency, as he has started it again this month, by violating the emoluments clauses of the Constitution. These are two anti-corruption provisions of the Constitution that are designed to ensure that those in power, including the president, are not able to treat their positions of power as profit-making enterprises at the public expense. And Donald Trump has refused to divest from his business interests all over the world. So he was already, the moment he took that oath, in violation of those anti-corruption provisions of the Constitution. But we then went on in 2017 to account for all the impeachable offenses he was committing, which piled up significantly. So we took issue with the notion that he should only face impeachment around the Ukraine matter. We
right.
had a long list by then, and frankly, we thought it was a mistake to wait all the way until then to have that impeachment inquiry. And that's exactly why we've started this again in 2025. Congress must uphold its responsibility, the oath that each member of Congress takes to protect and defend the Constitution. There's no question that in the less than 2 weeks that Donald Trump has been back in power, he's been abusing his powers, he's been trampling on the Constitution, and that requires that members of Congress who still believe in the Constitution stand up now and use this impeachment clause, which is there for a reason, to protect the republic from corrupt executives.
Can you give us a few examples of what you mean, like you feel like now he's already stepped out of line? What do you mean by that?
Well, just today, actually, we've added to our site and impeach Trump again, multiple new grounds for impeachment beyond the emoluments clause violations that I mentioned. We did start out with that on January 20th. In addition, we referenced all the corrupt and unlawful practices that he engaged in the 2024 election. People think, impeachment only occurs, impeachable offenses only occur once you've taken office. But in fact, the framers were clear on this, that if you corruptly obtained the office, that is a grounds for impeachment. There's a federal judge in 2010 from Louisiana who was impeached and removed from his position as a federal district court judge because he had lied under oath at his confirmation hearings prior to becoming a federal judge. Here we have a president who engaged in multiple unlawful practices leading up to this inauguration, including campaign finance violations, and of course the super PAC coordination with Elon Musk, using effectively an illegal practice of providing people money in order to register to vote. He promised oil and gas executives tax and regulatory favors if they came up with $1 billion in donations. He used xenophobic and racist rhetoric that threatened communities in Springfield, Ohio, and Aurora, Colorado. He engaged in physical threats to people, including his opponents from the prior administration. So all of this stacked up to being impeachable offenses as well. But then, of course, the moment he got there, he engaged in this massive abuse of the pardon power by pardoning the 1,500 plus January 6th insurrectionists, all in a way to engage in self-dealing, because he, of course, was the individual who incited that insurrection. So by pardoning them all, he's engaged in self-dealing to protect himself as well. And that is a clear abuse of the pardon power. He has also abused his emergency powers as president by declaring a national emergency at the border that then allows him wrongfully and illegally to send U.S. military troops to the border. He has engaged in
usurping legislative powers
with this recent freeze on financial assistance,
Right.
pausing all federal funding when Congress is the entity that appropriates the money, and he had no basis whatsoever to engage in that freeze. Now, yes, a court has put a pause on it, and yes, the White House has rescinded that order, but these are already grounds for an impeachment inquiry for that abuse of power. The list goes on, and frankly, what has to happen here is the launch of an impeachment inquiry to account for these abuses that have already occurred and the ones that will surely occur going forward as this lawless president assumes the idea somehow that he can continue to trample on the Constitution.
John, last night I reached out to each one of the county party chairs, Democratic Party chairs of the 58 counties here in California. And I know some of them very well. And the feedback I was getting was impeachment already. And Democrats, you should know that Democrats here in California feel very marginalized. We had a governor who was not even invited to the president's visit when he came to inspect the fires in Malibu and Eden. Our governor, Gavin Newsom, showed up on the tarmac in jeans and a sweatshirt, and to greet the president. He was uninvited. He attempted to shake the president's hand and put his arm around him, and you could hear the president saying on the video, "Don't call me bro." He says, "I'm not your bro," and that was it. The president marched off to meet with the L.A. mayor and her first responders team, and Gavin Newsom went back to Sacramento. So Democrats feel very marginalized, not just here in California, but throughout the country, losing both the Senate and the House and the White House and the Supreme Court. What words of hope would you give to Democrats?
Well, first, I want to emphasize, right, we are a nonpartisan organization, so we reach out to people all across the political spectrum who believe in standing up for our democracy and our Constitution. So what I would say to anyone who is in despair around that cause of standing up for our democracy and our Constitution is that the other side that is attacking our democracy and our Constitution, they want us to give up. They want us to be on the sidelines. They want us to stay silent, and all the more reason why we have a duty to stand up and fight. And another thing that we're announcing today, in addition to our additional grounds for impeachable offenses, is that more than 100,000 people just in the past 10 days have already signed our petition at impeachtrumpagain.org calling for this impeachment inquiry. Clearly, there is a groundswell of support in the American public for people standing up and for Congress to stand up and do its duty. So look, I understand some people will say, well, isn't it too soon? It's not too soon when you look at these abuses of power. It's not too soon when you see the kind of rogue trampling of the Constitution that's occurred already. We have a duty to stand up, and the tens of thousands of people that have already joined this campaign is a demonstration of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that past campaigns to impeach Trump were nonpartisan. I know that we have that at least two members of the current House were Republicans who voted to impeach Trump, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. David Vallejo of the Central Valley here in California, and Dan. God, what was his last name? Dan. Somebody out of the state of Dan Newhouse out of the state of
Yes.
Washington. I think there were 7 Republicans in total that voted to impeach Trump. 5 of them were defeated, either in their primaries,
Yeah.
or in the general election. And in the Senate, there were several Republican senators who voted for impeachment. Some of them have retired. So that number has dwindled, but it goes to the point that Republicans did vote for impeachment. Do you care to speak on that?
No question about it. There were bipartisan votes both in the House and the Senate. Now we know there's a requirement in the Senate of 2/3 to convict, and that threshold was not met. But 57 senators, which of course included Republican senators, voted to convict. So you had majorities in both the House and the Senate that believed that this was a president who had abused his power, particularly with respect to the insurrection, and that he ought to be removed. And further, that he should be barred from ever running for public office again. That was included in that article in the second impeachment. Leaving aside Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, the Insurrectionist Disqualification Clause, which clearly establishes that Donald Trump is disqualified from holding public office again, we now see the need for a third impeachment investigation of this lawless president. And, we know when we launched this in 2017 that it was going to take time for members of Congress to have the backbone and the courage to stand up. But what it's going to require is we, the people, speaking up. And that's what happened in 2017, 2018, which led to the first impeachment. And that's what's going to happen again now. For everybody who's listening, who thinks there is not any resistance coming from Washington, we are the resistance. All of us together are the ones who can stand up and demand that our elected officials in Washington protect and defend the Constitution.
John, we have listeners throughout the country on the web stream, and I have a friend who's a reporter at the Washington Post who just informed me that a total of 10 House Republicans voted for impeachment against Trump. As we said, only 2 are still serving. 4 retired, and 4 others: Wyoming's Liz Cheney, Michigan's Peter Mayhew, South Carolina's Tom Rice, and Washington State's Jamie Herrera Butler, lost in primaries to Trump-backed challengers. There were 7 Senate Republicans who voted to convict Trump in his second impeachment trial, who have returned this year. And Lisa Murkowski, Louisiana Bill Cassidy, and Maine Susan Collins would lead that group. So there is, I don't want to call them a token group of Republicans who vote their conscience, but they're out there. And clearly, to impeach Trump, we would need bipartisan support.
We would. But we first and foremost need a mass movement all across the country of people who recognize that we still believe in democracy and we still believe in our Constitution, and we do not want to have a tyrant or a monarch or a dictator as leading this country.
When Republicans started learning that Trump-backed challengers were out to defeat them in the primary of the general election, a GOP super PAC called National Interest Action stepped in to support some of those members of Congress who did vote for impeachment, some of those Republicans who did vote for impeachment. Do you have any connection with National Interest Action or any other groups in an effort to impeach? Do you have allies?
We do have allies. I should say we don't coordinate with any political action committees because of our nonpartisan status, but we did build a broad coalition in the last impeachment fight that we had, and we intend to do that again this time. We've already heard from allies that worked with us that put forward local resolutions calling for impeachment. We've already heard from some of them that they're on board again. And look, what we're going to see here, I think, with respect to this campaign is it's only going to grow because the outrage is going to grow and the violations of the law and of the Constitution are going to grow. And that's why literally in 10 days, 100,000 plus people have already signed up and said, we're on board for calling for Congress to initiate an impeachment inquiry of this president.
Let's go through the grounds for impeachment again. So you have pre-election and then you have post-inauguration. On the pre-election side, I heard you say Trump violated campaign finance laws, and I want you to elaborate on that he used racist and xenophobic rhetoric. I'd like you to elaborate on that. He threatened physical violence against political opponents, including against a U.S. military commander, journalists, and protesters. Please elaborate on that, and spreading dangerous disinformation about U.S. hurricane disaster response. That's all during the campaign. Why don't you elaborate on those 4 areas for grounds for impeachment?
Yes. So first, on the violating campaign finance laws, what we highlight on our site is that these included offering benefits in exchange for campaign contributions, such as offering tax and regulatory favors to oil and gas executives if they provided $1 billion in contributions. Clear violation of campaign finance law. Right. Concealing legal service payments by his campaign and related super PACs. In other words, funding his litigation defense, unlawfully using campaign money. Unlawfully coordinating with super PACs that supported his candidacy, including those financed by billionaires he later appointed to key administrative positions. And this one, of course, is the one I highlighted earlier, facilitating and accepting unlawful campaign contributions from Elon Musk via X and via Musk's $1 million lottery scheme.
Right.
That paid out prizes only to individuals who would publicly support Trump.
Yeah.
So that's just violating campaign finance laws. Then we get to using racist and xenophobic rhetoric. This included referring to immigrants in Aurora, Colorado as, quote, bloodthirsty criminals,
right,
from whom voters have to be rescued, repeating false claims about Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, even after such claims led to bomb threats and other threats of violence, and referring to immigrants as committing, quote, horrendous crimes because of, quote, their genes.
Right.
And this kind of rhetoric resulted in threats of violence to immigrant communities and was very dangerous and is not, accepted as a lawful campaign practice. Further, he threatened physical violence, including murder, against political opponents. A U.S. military commander, he said that General Mark Milley should be executed against journalists, against protesters. And then he, of course, spread dangerous information about the U.S. hurricane disaster response in North Carolina, somehow claiming that FEMA was not carrying out that response because of it being in a red state or red areas of the state. All of this were outrages, but also corrupt and unlawful practices that led him to obtain the office. We add that to the emoluments violations I mentioned that all occurred on day one by not having divested from his business interests. He gets foreign payments for his Trump Tower units from foreign governments. These are direct violations of the Foreign Emoluments Clause. And of course, he is enriching himself with all of his business interests now subject to gaining further profit through his regulatory actions as president. So having not divested himself from those interests, he's in direct violation of those clauses. Then hours into his presidency, he issues these sweeping pardons of the January 6th insurrectionists.
Right.
We've already heard from a report today on National Public Radio that dozens of those insurrectionists had prior criminal records through which they're now facing, further enforcement because they're out on the loose after having committed other violent crimes beyond the insurrection crime that they committed with respect to January 6, 2021. But this was all self-dealing. It was designed to protect himself because he incited this insurrection. He's the one who led this mob to attack the Capitol to try to block the peaceful transfer of power. And then, we get to the birthright citizenship matter. right? He issues an executive order unconstitutionally stripping U.S. citizens of their citizenship. The 14th Amendment's very clear. If you're born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen. He cannot, as President of the United States, repeal a provision of the Constitution. That's not how it's done. If he wants to overturn that amendment or that provision of the amendment, he needs to go to Congress with an amendment bill. He needs to get Congress, 2/3 of it, to pass that amendment. Then he needs to get 3/4 of the states to ratify it. And that's the only way he can remove that provision from the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. And look, any lawyer advising him would know that. So they're all in on it, engaging in this unlawful, unconstitutional executive order. It has been paused and blocked by a federal judge already. And we expect that it will be blocked by the courts going forward. But that doesn't take away the fact that he engaged in this abuse of power and deserves to face an impeachment inquiry based on that. Then we get to unlawfully firing the inspectors general.
Right.
Now, these inspector generals are in these federal agencies to protect against waste, fraud, corruption, and abuse of power. That's why they're there. And he, in this late Friday night purge, fires more than a dozen of them at federal agencies across the board, and effectively allows now for those agencies to engage in waste, fraud, corruption, abuse of power without any independent oversight. Further, because he had done something like this in his prior administration, Congress passed a law in 2022 that required 30 days notice to the U.S. Congress for any removal of an inspector general from one of these agencies, and provided a substantial rationale, quote unquote, for removing that inspector general. He just wholesale ignored that new federal law that was enacted in 2022. He didn't provide 30 days notice. He didn't provide any substantive rationale. He just completely violated the law in issuing those firings. And then we get to abusing his power to seek retribution against perceived adversaries. He unlawfully fires career Justice Department attorneys,
Right,
investigating him and all the crimes he had committed associated with the insurrection and associated with his classified document scandal. These were career prosecutors, and the purpose of the Department of Justice, of course, is designed to be independent from the executive, from the president. It's not an arm. It's not a legal arm of the president. He has a White House counsel's office that is his, official legal arm in the White House. But the Department of Justice is an entirely independent agency from that standpoint. Yes, he has a political appointment there of the Attorney General and other political appointments, but the vast majority of people working in that department are career attorneys, career prosecutors, and others. And there's a history of DOJ independence dating back decades that he has just wholesale usurped here in making those firings. And of course, all of it's designed to protect himself. And then he's got the persecution of retired General Mark Milley, who he on the campaign trail was clear that he wanted to go after. He's removed his security detail from him, despite the fact he's received death threats and deserves that security detail. And he's launched a full-scale investigation through his wholly unqualified Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, to engage in investigating General Milley.
So
go ahead.
You make a very comprehensive case for grounds for impeachment, both during the campaign phase and then post-inauguration. I have one. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but maybe you can tell me whether this would be grounds for impeachment. As you know, on Monday, President Trump ordered a freeze on domestic and foreign federal aid in an effort to stop government funding for causes that didn't fit in his agenda. The memo was sent out under the signature of Matthew J. Vaith, acting director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, that went into effect on Tuesday, and they related to a string of executive orders that Trump has signed. Again, quoting from that memo, and I'm wondering whether this was constitutional or not, quoting from the memo, federal agencies must temporarily pause all activities related to the obligation or disbursement of all federal financial assistance and other relevant agency activities that may be implicated by executive orders, including but not limited to financial assistance of foreign aid, non-government organizations, DEI, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal. End of quote. The memo hit the streets on Tuesday. It caused a huge uproar in Washington and in turn caused Trump to withdraw the memo. I'm wondering whether that memo was constitutional.
You're absolutely right, John. It was not constitutional, and we have added that as well, that impeach Trump again as an impeachable offense. He unconstitutionally usurped legislative powers. This freeze he had in this memo, whether temporary or permanent, was blatantly unlawful. The trillions of dollars in funding subject to the freeze and review have been appropriated by Congress for disbursement pursuant to power constitutionally granted to the legislative branch. Senator Angus King of Maine said this was the greatest assault on the United States Congress in the history of the United States. And the only thing that Senator Angus King needs to add to that sentence is, and that's why I support an impeachment inquiry of President Donald Trump. That's the only thing you need to add, because look, that greatest assault on Congress in the history of the United States surely on its own deserves an impeachment inquiry. But yes, we've added that. We've also, I should say, added the abuse of emergency powers, which I mentioned earlier, in which Donald Trump declares an emergency at the border, and that now has him sending U.S. military troops to the border, abusing, his powers.
It's 33 minutes past the hour. There's a lot to unpack here. I do want to mention that we have a caller for you, John. So if that caller is still on the line, please, caller, go ahead with your question.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, Mr. Bonifaz, I think you're building a really strong case, and I'm quite familiar with your. Can you hear me?
Yes, but you're breaking up.
You're breaking up. I think you're on your speakerphone.
I think you're building a really strong case, but I wanted to ask a tactical question. I mean, I know your important and impressive work with voting rights, and you were very tactical there. I'm wondering about going back to the question of timing and getting the votes. Putting it forward is important, but don't you think it might be better to work really hard to get a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate into the 2026 elections, and then be able to overturn the Supreme Court immunity ruling, and then bring the impeachment in early 2026, even though we'll have to suffer quite a lot before then?
Well, I think the way we build toward any opportunity for Congress to exercise its authority and do its duty is by starting now. I think if we wait until 2026 to build this mass movement, we will see it quickly become 2028. I just think that we have to start the process now. We can't be silent with these abuses of power that are going to continue to go forward as they have in the past 10 days. It calls out for we, the people, to speak up. That doesn't mean that we expect Congress under this current makeup to immediately start impeachment proceedings tomorrow. That doesn't mean that, but it does mean that in order to build to the point when we see a majority with the willingness and the backbone to do that, we have to start now.
If you're just tuning in, it's 9:35, and this is Heroes and Patriots. It is our 5th Thursday of the month. Our guest today is John C. Bonifaz. He is a constitutional attorney and the co-founder and president of Free Speech for People. And John, we've been discussing how a case seems to be building against another impeachment
already
against our current president. I was interested to listening to the caller about the midterm elections. Right now, as John had already mentioned, the Senate, the House, the courts, president, all Republican. You're very familiar with voting and voting rights. Do you think there's a possibility that the Democrats can move into some of those spots that would even out the playing field for change?
Well, again, we look at our work from a strictly nonpartisan basis, so we stay away from the electoral arena, if you will, except in terms of protecting the electoral process through voting rights litigation and so forth. But what I will say is that I think anyone who has the courage to stand up for our democracy today and stand up for our Constitution, they will find a groundswell of support in the American public. And I think as the days go on and we see this kind of rogue abuse of power continue, there will be further and further questions about where are our leaders? Where are the people in power who are standing up? And the more that they say, well, I'm going to issue a statement, that doesn't really do more than just go on their website and doesn't call for the invoking of the impeachment clause of the Constitution, the more people are going to need to push back and say that's not enough. It's not enough to put out a tweet or put out a statement on your site that says you condemn this or that action. You need to go further and invoke the impeachment power. And look, any member of Congress in the U.S. House of Representatives can introduce today articles of impeachment. That doesn't mean that they will get voted on, right away, although you can take it as a privilege resolution to the floor of the House if you wanted to get an immediate vote. But what it does mean is that debate would then be elevated further and would start in Congress. But we're prepared at Free Speech for People, working with allies all across the country and the tens of thousands of people who've already signed on. We're prepared to take this to the American people and elevate that debate as a national conversation as to why we need to protect our Constitution with the impeachment clause.
We've been covering a lot of the domestic issues and infractions committed by Trump or allegedly committed by Trump. And we talked about the emoluments, which involves foreign entities. Are there other areas that Trump is sort of moving his influence in with respect to foreign allies or not?
Yeah, and particularly as it relates to Greenland.
Well, there's no question that he has his business interests all over the world, still, including efforts to build new Trump towers elsewhere, and all of those because of his financial investments in his company. All of those stand to enrich himself with foreign governments participating in paying him. But even beyond that, as I mentioned, there are foreign governments who already have spaces in Trump Tower, and they pay monthly fees, and it's $2 million total or more that he's getting from foreign governments that he's refused to divest from. But I do want to highlight that in addition to the foreign domestic emoluments clause, there's the domestic emoluments. I'm sorry, foreign emoluments clause. There's the domestic emoluments clause, and that deals with a president not being able to gain a profit from the United States, meaning from the federal government or from states, from state governments. And yet he's also in violation of that. He has his Gulf League backed by the Saudi Arabian government. He has the Trump Media and Technology Group. He has Truth Social. He has World Liberty Financial, a cryptocurrency project that will funnel 70% of its net profits directly to Trump. And he, of course, wants to engage in providing deregulation of the cryptocurrency industry. So all of this is also in violation of the emoluments clause. These are anti-corruption provisions in the Constitution. They're designed to prevent this very point, which is that an executive cannot enrich himself at the expense of the public.
John, I want you to talk about the role of independent media in monitoring Trump. I've got no faith in mainstream media. And to my point, we talked about that memo that the Office of Management and Budget put out, just rolling back trillions of dollars of spending that government had already voted on and approved, rolling it back unconstitutionally, and then members of Congress stepping in later this week in protest, and then suddenly Trump puts the brakes on it. That whole rollback, that memo was discovered by Marissa Kabish at the Handbasket. not mainstream media, but a reporter at an entity called the Handbasket. Independent media. We're independent media.
Mhm.
I will be taking a video, a copy of this show, and hand delivering it to Adam Schiff. Hand delivering it to him. We're independent media. We're the little radio station, the little public radio station that could, in the middle of the Redwood Forest here in Northern California. We've got a very small staff. Our membership director is engineering this show, Dorothy. We're getting double duty out of her. There's probably many other jobs that she does at the station. But yet we were featured in a Netflix documentary, Murder Mountain. We're the little station that could. We're the little engine that could. Explain the role of independent media in keeping tabs on Trump.
Well, I first want to say that I'm proud that this is the first interview that I'm doing on our impeachment campaign, with respect to a radio interview since launching this on January 20th. And it's precisely because of who you all are. The independent media is critical, absolutely critical to the preservation of our democracy. When we look at the way in which corporate media is now being muzzled or is co-opting, cooperating with this lawless administration, we see the danger associated with relying on getting our information from those channels. Look at what Mark Zuckerberg has done, removing any fact checking from Meta and cozying up to Donald Trump. Look at that inauguration, the seating arrangement where you had the ex-presidents, right on the same level with the tech executives, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg. This is where we are. I mean, if anything, President Biden's warning that we were now facing an oligarchy should have been given to us many, many months before, if not years, before that farewell address. But he was absolutely right when he finally said it. And that's what we're facing. And I think that's all the more reason why an independent media is critical to preserving our republic. We need the ability to hear that information, to get that information from sources that are not compromised because they themselves feel that they got to cozy up to this dictator wannabe.
Here in Northern California, we work closely with Norman Solomon, who you may or may not know.
Yes.
He co-founded the Institute for Public Accuracy for the Media, and then Roots Action on the activist side of things.
Yes.
Do you work with an organization like his and other groups of activists?
Well, absolutely. And as I mentioned at the outset, we launched our first impeachment campaign with Roots Action in 2017. It was co-led with Roots Action, and I have great respect for Norman Solomon.
Great.
You mentioned the very wealthy people that were in the front row at the inauguration. And given your history with voting and money, could you speak to us, since all these people now have kind of come to the fore and are even being given positions in Trump's administration, how do you see that playing out with all these moneyed people having so much access to the president and voting?
I mean, it's just clear that the rampant corruption that's happening here needs to be stopped. I mean, our original work at Free Speech for People, why we were launched and got off the ground, has been about big money in politics and challenging it. And we're going to keep going on that work as well. We have initiatives to abolish super PACs, to end foreign influence corporate spending in our elections, and ultimately a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United and the doctrines underlying that Supreme Court ruling of money equaling speech and corporations being treated as people. But this now, what we see today, with the influence of people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, this is the direct outgrowth of that Citizens United ruling and of the prior ruling, 1976, of Buckley v. Vallejo, which equated money with speech. We've seen this trajectory where now the billionaire class can dominate our politics and control our government. And no one should be mistaken of what has happened here. And this is exactly why, we need to change this system entirely, overhaul it, and make clear that private money big money influence has no basis in drowning out the voices of ordinary citizens. We, as voters,
Well put.
need to be heard on an equal and meaningful basis.
Right. Very well put. John, you had another question?
Yes. We just heard from a friend of ours who works at the Wall Street Journal, a friend of the show, who pointed out to me in an email message just now, and I'm reading from it, that as a result of Trump sending out this memo through the Office of Management and Budget, rolling back trillions of dollars in aid. We have another caller. Well, let's take the caller first. This is public radio.
Yeah. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your brief question. Hello?
Well, that might be me.
You're ready? Go ahead with your question.
Yes. Well, I don't necessarily have a question, but
Comment.
you know, the thing is that we definitely give power to people with our vote. And
Yes.
who are we voting for exactly? And like, there's so much more I could say here,
Well, we
but
appreciate
I'm not feeling that well. And I just, I think, well, my belief is don't vote because
okay, I think she said don't vote it there at the end,
Yeah,
but
but that's a good point, John. Trump got the popular vote, so I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Believe me, I'm on your
never.
I'm on your side, buddy.
Not John.
I don't have a MacArthur Genius Award, but I know somebody who does. Um, I'll play the devil's advocate. So Trump won the popular vote. So why are we giving the guy such a hard time? Let him do his job for at least a little while, and let him get himself in as much.
We were talking about super PACs.
Well, we
No,
were
but
also-
I want to answer that question because I know people will say, well, he had this mandate. Well, first of all, we have to
he had
question.
the mandate.
Right.
We first have to question what kind of a mandate did he really have. It was the smallest margin in years with respect to the popular vote, as well as with respect to the changes in the vote margins in the Electoral College, and it was unverified. We never had election verification take place. But leaving all that aside, the fact that he was declared the winner of the presidential election and was sworn into office does not mean that he gets to violate his oath. These are two separate things. People didn't vote to give him the license to now trample on the Constitution and abuse his powers. He takes an oath of office, on January 20th, as every president does on Inauguration Day, to protect and defend the Constitution. He doesn't just, get handed the certificate of presidency, say, here, go ahead and do whatever you want. No, he takes an oath. And that oath is to protect and defend the Constitution. If he violates that oath, if he engages in high crimes and misdemeanors, if he abuses the power of his office, then Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution then comes into play. That's the impeachment clause. So no one coming into power, whether they're a member of Congress, because they take those oaths as well, a member of the U.S. Senate, no one, despite, even if they got 99.9% of the vote, no one gets to come in and abuse their power. No one gets to violate their oath. No one, no matter what that claimed mandate is, gets to trample on the Constitution. We still believe in a democracy at Free Speech for People, and I know your listeners do too, and you do too. We still believe in the Constitution, and if we do, then we got to stand up and fight for it right now because it is on the line. Democracy and the Constitution, they are on the line.
Tell us how to help.
Is that going through our Congress or our congressperson? How do we do that? I mean, this is a big challenge.
It's a big challenge.
People in Washington that know these things but aren't following on, that are in.
Here's what we got to do. We got to speak up and build the power in the constituency that says to those members of Congress that may have some backbone that they need to now introduce a resolution for an impeachment inquiry. That starts with joining us at impeachtrumpagain.org. We've got a petition on the site. Sign that petition. We've already today are announcing over 100,000 people across the country have already signed it in the past 10 days. The more we build that number, the more we show members of Congress that hundreds of thousands of more people are signing up, then the Congress will hear us. But we got to write them letters. We got to call them. We got to engage in passing local resolutions. All this has to be built from the grassroots up, and that's how we get our members of Congress to hear us.
We're going to get to that at the close of the show. We're going to give you the last word. You're going to review all that. You're going to say all that again. The point I was going to make before this, before our caller, was that I heard from a friend at the Wall Street Journal who's doing a story on this budget memo that went out under Trump, rolling back trillions of dollars in spending that Congress had already approved and was enshrined in law. And he said, as a result of Trump's order, the money switch got flicked on and it got flicked off. As a result of that switch going up and down, the system crashed. And it crashed the Medicaid reimbursement portal, which went down across the country after the spending freeze. It warned that the White House directive could halt early childhood development spending, healthcare and housing funds. And Democrats also said that cancer research, police and fire programs could get also caught in the crosshairs of the switch being flipped up and down. And all of that, these various constituencies argued, represented a lawless ploy to make way for Trump's agenda of tax cuts for
another caller
for public programs.
Let's hold that and take that last question before we wrap it up. Caller, go ahead with your question.
For public programs. Let's hold that.
Turn your radio down, sir.
Caller, you're on the air.
Well, thank you so very much. Thank you for this informative program, consistently empowering. When we speak of media and a little radio station that could, we have platforms like X and Google, which are deeply embedded with this administration, qualifying and disseminating lack of factual information. We have someone who's assumed power who has made obvious threats against a four-star general, Mr. Milley, who directly refuted the order to use the military on the populace. My question would be this. What is the likelihood under this administration that we can have a peaceful protest in this country when the president and his administration have qualified vigilantes and wingnuts, including those in the law enforcement sphere and the military? I'll take the question off the air. Be peaceful, folks. Be healthy, and God help us all.
Thank you, caller. John?
It was an excellent statement by that caller, and I surely share the concerns with respect to the peaceful protest question. But, we have to continue to stand up and demand our freedoms and our rights be protected. And that is going to require us calling on those in power to make clear there's a check on this lawless president. But I also think at the end of the day that this president understands that he is only going to be able to get away with this if people remain silent, if people stay on the sidelines. He wants people to be scared. He wants people to not stand up to him. And that's how he thinks he's going to get away with it. And the more we demonstrate that that's not going to happen, the more opportunity we have to show those in power they have the responsibility to stand up.
John Bonifaz, we have about 3 minutes before we need to sign off. Tell again our listeners how they can become involved very specifically.
So we invite people to join this campaign at impeachtrumpagain.org to sign our petition calling for an impeachment inquiry of this lawless president, to join us in calling members of Congress, call your member of Congress, write your member of Congress, share the grounds that we have detailed on that site, Impeach Trump Again, for why an impeachment inquiry is needed now. And, we invite people to join our work overall at freespeechforpeople.org to sign up for updates. We're fighting for our democracy on multiple fronts, taking on big money in politics, protecting our right to vote, taking on social media companies when they're not held liable for spreading threats of violence and disinformation on their platforms. All of this is critical in the fight for our democracy, and we invite people to join us in this fight. And we appreciate this radio station and so many others who are speaking out and having voices heard that need to be heard on this question.
And I want to refer people to the Newsweek article that recently came out with your information about why this needs to happen. I'm assuming on your website you have the various things that we covered in today's program that people can be more familiar with as they approach their congressman and woman.
Yes, it's all detailed at Impeach Trump Again. Very lengthy explanation of each of the impeachable offenses we've discussed today.
John, we wish you lived next door.
That would be great.
Norman lives right down the street at Point Reyes Station. So
tell him I say hi.
Yeah, we
will.
And we'd make quite a team. But we're going to stay in touch with you. We're going to have you back on the show. You've been a great guest.
Yeah.
Again, I want to thank the Erickson Group for suggesting you as a guest. You're very well spoken, and you're arguing for the right cause. We hope to have you back. The Erickson Group is also trying to help us get Ben Cohen of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream, who's got
for next week
for $100,000 prize that he is advertising for the best idea to cut waste and fraud and corruption at the Department of Defense. Now, keep in mind, Ben and Jerry's closed their ice cream parlors, their retail stores in Israel as a protest against Israel's war crimes in Palestine. And Ben Cohen is no longer an owner of Ben and Jerry's. They sold the company to Quaker, and then Quaker sold it to Unilever, I think. So I don't know how much leverage he has on policy. I think he sits on their board or sits on the foundation's board, something like that. But he's still an activist, and we hope to have him on the show next week. So back-to-back, 2 great shows. You, John, Ben Cohen. Public radio doesn't get any better than that.
He's a great patriot. Yes, great to be with you.
And listeners, please join us next Thursday for another program from 9 to 10 Pacific time. And again, as John said, we hope to have Ben Cohen.
And to our listeners, please become members, or you renew your membership. Underwriters, please show your appreciation for this show and everything that we do here at KMUD Radio by becoming a member or an underwriter. The little station, not just that could, but that does. We do the job. We do.
Have a great day.
And thank you, Dorothy, for engineering the show.